Shalom, welcome back. Alright, so shifting gears a little bit here. We're going to be looking at a possible eighth warning from Yeshua about Paul. I've got a video that I made a while back that has 7 warnings specifically to Paul. And somebody made a Facebook post the other day and made a couple of connections I hadn't considered before, so it's possible that we have another warning about Paul. So we're going to talk about a tale of 2 shepherds. And so we're going to start off in John chapter 9, and it says, "As he passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, 'Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?' Yeshua answered, 'Neither did this man sin nor his parents, that the works of God might be revealed in him. I must work in the works of him who sent me while it is still day. The night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world.' When he had said this, he spat on the ground, made mud with his saliva, anointed the blind man's eyes with the mud, and said to him, 'Go and wash in the pool of Siloam,' which means sent. So he went away, washed, and came back seeing." So there's a few things going on, and we're going to read this whole story about the blind man. It's a little bit long, but we'll go into it anyway. Notice there's a little bit of a warning here. The night is coming when no one can work. So he's claiming to be the sent one, doing the works of the one who sent me. And then he tells the man to go wash in the pool, which means sent. And so he's warning that right now he's shepherding his sheep. He's taking care of his people, giving the sight to the blind and such. But the time is coming, night is coming, when no one can work. So there's something's going to happen after Yeshua leaves, after he's no longer in the world. The neighbors, therefore, and those who saw that he was blind before said, 'Isn't this he who sat and begged?' Others were saying, 'It is he,' and still others were saying, 'He looks like him.' And he said, 'I am he.' And they therefore were asking him, 'How were your eyes opened?' He answered, 'A man called Yeshua made mud, anointed my eyes, and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight.' Then they asked him, 'Where is he?' And he said, 'I don't know.' They brought him who had been blind to the Pharisees. It was a Sabbath when Yeshua made the mud and opened his eyes. Again, therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he received his sight. And he said to them, 'He put mud on my eyes, and I washed, and I see.' Some, therefore, of the Pharisees said, 'This man is not from God, because he doesn't keep the Sabbath.'" Now, I want to point out here, because people don't seem to understand this, that there is no commandment in the Torah, in the law, that says, "Thou shalt not make mud on the Sabbath and anoint somebody's eyes." There is no commandment that says, "Thou shalt not heal on the Sabbath." And it wasn't even necessarily that Yeshua himself was doing the healing. It was his Father working through him. So you can pray all day for someone to be healed, but if God doesn't desire it, it's not going to happen. So it's essentially, this whole concept of not healing on the Sabbath, it just seems like you're putting a restriction on God himself. But I just want to point that out, because I hear a lot of Christians falsely accusing Yeshua of breaking the Sabbath. I don't know that he ever broke the Sabbath. I see him being accused of it. And then a lot of Christians just kind of join in with the accusers and, call the Messiah a sinner. I personally don't think that's a good idea, but, have at it there. Ye who work iniquity, go ahead and, pile on, call the Messiah a sinner. Myself, I'm going to stick to a different program and just acknowledge that there is no commandment that he was breaking. It was just man-made observances. Others said, "How can a man who is a sinner do such great signs?" And there was a division among them. So this is something that I pointed out before in my series on who is Esau Edom, because there was this whole situation going on in Judea that 99.9% of followers of Yeshua are not aware of. There was a Edomite incursion that took place over the course of 150 years, where John Hyrcanus, one of the Hashmonean kings, around the year 135 BC, he invaded Edom and subdued the Edomites. And he gave them a choice. You guys can either convert to the religion of Judea and circumcise yourself and start keeping the Torah, or we're going to exile you out of this land. And so most of them chose to become circumcised and start keeping the faith of Judea. Some refused and left, and they migrated up through Turkey and into the area known as Khazaria, which is modern-day Ukraine. So, but out of the ones that stayed and converted to Judaism, they became known as Jews. So in the Tanakh, in the Old Testament, you hear these Judites. They were, descendants of the tribe of Judah. But then when the New Testament comes around, they're no longer called Judites. They're called Jews or Judeans or whatever. Well, it's because they were a mixture of Judites and Edomites who called themselves Jews. And so you can get this whole history by reading Josephus' Antiquities, and then also some of it's in the War of the Jews. But the Pharisees and the Sadducees were mostly Edomites. The Herods were Edomites. These Edomites were absorbed into Judean society and eventually kind of rose to the top and sought out positions of power over the Israelites. And so by the time Yeshua comes around, the Israelites are all in subjection to the Edomites. The Edomites were ruling over them. And you hear a lot about Rome, about the Roman occupation. Well, the Edomites were the group that was in between the Romans and the Israelites. It wasn't usually necessarily the Romans themselves doing most of the oppression. Most of the oppression was coming from the Edomites, who were the kind of the taskmasters that were put over the Israelites. So this division, you had two groups of people in this group known as Judeans. There was Edomites and Israelites, and so there's a division. I believe the division is between the Israelites, who were God's people, and the Edomites, who call themselves God's people, but they were not. They're actually in Malachi, it's the only time that God says he hates a group of people. He hates the Edomites. So check out Malachi if you want to read that. So there's a division among the people. So what I think was going on is the Israelites, his sheep, my sheep hear my voice, his sheep were following him. His sheep were the ones who were submitting themselves to him. The ones that were arguing with Yeshua, the ones who were opposed to Yeshua, were not his sheep. So they must have been from a different flock. So you start applying the history to what's being said here, and it starts making sense. Therefore they asked the blind man again, "What do you say about him, because he opened your eyes?" And he said, "He's a prophet." The Judeans therefore did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and had received his sight, until they called his parents of him who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son, whom you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" And his parents answered them, "We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but how he now sees we don't know, or who opened his eyes we don't know. He is of age. Ask him. He will speak for himself." His parents said these things because they feared the Judeans, for the Judeans had already agreed that if any man would confess Yeshua as Messiah, he would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age. Ask him." So they called the man who was blind a second time and said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." And he therefore answered, "I don't know if he's a sinner, but one thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him again, What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered them, I told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? You don't also want to become his disciples, do you? And they insulted him and said, You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we don't know where he comes from. The man answered, How amazing! You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, for if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, he listens to him. Since the world began, it has never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of someone born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. They answered him, You were altogether born in sins, and do you teach us? And they threw him out. And Yeshua heard that they had thrown him out, and finding him, he said, Do you devote yourself to the Son of God? And he answered, Who is he, Lord, that I may obey unto him? And Yeshua said to him, You have both seen him, and it is he who speaks with you. He said, Lord, I believe. And he knelt before him. Yeshua said, I came into this world for judgment, that those who don't see may see, and those who see may become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, Are we also blind? And Yeshua said to them, If you were blind, you wouldn't have sin. But now you say, We see, therefore your sin remains. So, Yeshua says that he's going to be, obviously giving sight to the blind, but then he's also going to be turning those who see become blind. We've kind of discussed this before, just the purpose of his parables. Why did he speak to them in parables? Well, it's because he didn't want them to know. Like he was concealing the truth by speaking in parables. So there's this whole interaction going on between Yeshua and the Pharisees, and I really think it's kind of building up and leading into the next chapter, John chapter 10, where Yeshua says, Most certainly I tell you, one who doesn't enter by the door unto the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a brigand. That word that I've translated brigand usually is a thief and a robber. And so what's the difference between a thief and a robber? Well, a thief steals by deceit. That's the guy that kind of sneaks into your house at night and takes your stuff while you're sleeping, and then you wake up and your stuff's gone. Or you leave your bicycle in your front yard and they come by and grab it and go, and you don't even see them. So that's a thief. A robber is somebody who robs you with violence, who confronts you and either uses violence or threatens violence. A more, I think, specific word is brigand. That's why I chose it, because a brigand is someone who's violent. They come to pillage and plunder and use violence to basically like overthrow civilization, like groups of people, rather than even just robbing one person. It's also, incidentally, the same word that's used when Yeshua is in the temple. He says, You've made my Father's house is supposed to be a house of prayer, and you've made it a den of brigands, or a den of violent ones. In fact, it's more specific in the Hebrew. The Hebrew is not about robbery. The Hebrew is about the violence. You made it a den of violence, or a den of violent ones. So the emphasis is on the violence, and so likewise that's why I chose brigand. The one who doesn't enter by the door into the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, the same as a thief and a brigand. But one who enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. Whenever he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. They will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they don't know the voice of strangers. Yeshua spoke this parable to them, but they didn't understand what he was telling them. Yeshua therefore said to them again, Most certainly I tell you, I am the sheep's door. So there's this parable, and Yeshua is calling himself a door, but then in the next slide he's going to be calling himself the shepherd. So how does this make sense? Like, it doesn't really make sense. How can he be the door and the shepherd? And so there's actually a artistic rendition of this. So at times the shepherd, when he would bring his sheep into the fold, he would actually sleep in the doorway to protect the sheep from any type of predator. And so here you see that illustrated, of course. So he is both the door and the shepherd. All who came before me are thieves and brigands. Again, same word that was used in the storming of the temple. But the sheep don't listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters in by me, he will be saved, and will go in and out, and will find pasture. The thief only comes to steal, sacrifice, and slaughter. So you typically hear this translated as steal, kill, and destroy. Well, the word there for kill is the word for sacrifice. This, for some reason, is translated kill here, and the word for kill, which I've translated as slaughter, is translated as destroy. So they're kind of doing a little musical chairs with the translation on this for some reason, but this is a pretty literal translation. Steal, sacrifice, and slaughter. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So this thief comes to steal, sacrifice, and slaughter. I think that what he's really doing is he's in this parable, he's talking about the religious leadership, the ones that support the sacrificial system. And it can be the Herods could be included in this, and it could be certainly the priests could be included in it, and even the Pharisees. Even though the Pharisees are not the ones in the temple making the sacrifices, they still support the system. Like, everybody toes the same line. And as we've discussed in previous videos, when we're looking at what is the justice of Yahweh, and we did this long study on Professor Mendenhall's book, Ancient Israel's Faith and History, and that really kind of went into how you have these two threads within the scripture. You have the blue thread, which is the thread of anti-animal sacrifices, where God wants obedience, justice, righteousness, mercy, taking care of your neighbor, helping the widow, and serving God by serving man on one hand. But then you have the red thread, which is about making these bloody sacrifices and slaughtering Yahweh's creation and burning a pyre, which you hear Yahweh in the prophet saying he detests these animal sacrifices. So you got these two competing factions that wrote the scriptures. Generally, as a general rule, the prophets followed the blue thread, and the red thread was introduced and promoted by the priests. So, and it's one of those things that people don't see it until they see it, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. The priests and the prophets are typically against each other, at odds with each other. The exception is the false prophets. False prophets, they're usually pretty well lined up with the priesthood. But the true prophets are typically opposed to the priesthood. In fact, Jeremiah himself, when Jerusalem is destroyed the first time, Jeremiah blames the priests. See, what had happened was the blue thread promotes Yahweh as being a suzerain king, the great king that rules over Israel. And you serve the king through obedience. Which, of course, is something we've lost sight of now. People call Jesus king, but they don't obey him. But kings make laws, and the king is obeyed. That's the way kingship works. The red thread, however, it introduces Yahweh as a divine patron. And a divine patron is a God who has a chosen people. And when it doesn't matter if the chosen people are righteous or wicked or whatever they are, the God is always going to cheer for and always going to back his people. You see that today in the world, like these Edomite Jews, they still call themselves God's chosen people. They're promoting God as this red thread God, the God of, he's got himself a chosen people, and they can be wicked and do whatever they want to, promote all kinds of abominations, but he's still going to support them. They're still his chosen people, and he's still their biggest fan. That's not the way God works. that's that's Yahweh demands righteousness and justice. That's why you see these Edomite Jews are trying to restart the temple sacrifices. They just did a red heifer sacrifice earlier this year. They're trying as hard as they can to get these sacrifices started back up. So the line is pretty well drawn. You got Jesus, who's a prophet, who's against the animal sacrifices. He's the blue thread, and then he's the red thread are the ones that want to wipe him out. What does he do that gets him killed? He goes into the temple and shuts down the animal sacrifices. That was the ultimate sin against the priesthood. They had to kill him for that. So this red thread, it didn't end with Jesus. It continued. And who picked up the red thread? Well, who was the agent of the high priest? Paul. Who was promoting, who was taking Yeshua's death and turning it into an animal sacrifice, which of course is something that I think Yeshua would have been opposed to. I think he would have been horrified at that. He knew it was going to happen. He knew that this person was going to come along and misrepresent what went on with him, what his death meant. But the red thread is still there. It didn't end at the death of Messiah. So the thief comes only to steal, sacrifice, and slaughter. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So you got a covenant of death and you got a covenant of life. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who doesn't own the sheep, sees a wolf coming, leaves the sheep and flees. A wolf snatches the sheep and scatters them. So now we've got this wolf being invoked. And Yeshua in Matthew 7:15, he invokes the wolf there too. He says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravening wolves. And I don't think we can take what's being said here in John 10 and not consider what was said in Matthew 7. So what is he saying in Matthew 7 about the ravening wolf? Well, there's only one other place in all of Scripture where the ravening wolf is mentioned, and that's in Genesis 49:27, where it says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he will devour the prey, and at evening he will divide the plunder. And the early church fathers, the patristics, they all agreed at the time that this represented Paul. Paul was the Benjaminite wolf. And part of the reason that they acknowledged that being Paul is because the Septuagint kind of toned down the second part about at evening he will divide the plunder and made it sound not quite as vicious as the Hebrew does. And so they said, oh, this perfectly matches Paul, because in the beginning he was devouring the prey, he was oppressing the church, and then in the evening he divided the goods, or whatever it said. But they misunderstood the prophecy, so they applied it to Paul. But then now the church doesn't want to apply this to Paul because it's saying that he's plundering the body of Christ. He's plundering the church. But either way, that's obviously what Yeshua is referring to. He's referring to the Benjaminite wolf prophecy, and there's only one Benjaminite mentioned in the entire New Testament, and that's Paul. The wolf snatches the sheep and scatters them. The hired hand flees because he's a hired hand and doesn't care for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my own, and I'm known by my own. Even as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, I lay my life down for the sheep. I have other sheep which are not of this fold. I must bring them also, and they will hear my voice. They will become one flock with one shepherd. Therefore the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it away from me, but I lay it down by myself. I have the power to lay it down. I have the power to take it up again. I received this commandment from my Father. Therefore a division arose again among the Judeans because of these words. Many of them said, he has a demon and is insane. Why do you listen to him? Others said, these are not the sayings of one possessed by a demon. It isn't possible for a demon to open the eyes of the blind, is it? And it was the feast of Hanukkah at Jerusalem. It was the winter, and Yeshua was walking in the temple in Solomon's porch. The Judeans therefore came around him and said to him, "How long will you hold us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly." Yeshua answered them, "I told you, and you don't believe. The works that I do in my Father's name, those testify about me. But you don't believe because you are not of my sheep, as I told you. So if they're not of his sheep, they're of another sheepfold." And we don't typically understand the history, so this kind of goes over most people's heads. But if you know the history, if you know what's happened in the last 200 years in Judea, then you know who he's speaking to. He's speaking to Edomites. "You are not of my flock, as I told you. My sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me." So what we have, I said at the top of the page, it says a tale of two shepherds, but it's really a tale of two shepherds and two flocks of sheep, too. And you could really divide these flocks into those two threads through Scripture, the red thread and the blue thread. Yeshua's here separating them, causing divisions between them. So there's actually a similar story of two shepherds that's told by Zechariah. So we'll flip on back to Zechariah 11. "Open your doors, Lebanon, that the fire may devour your cedars. Wail, fir trees, for the cedar has fallen, because the stately ones are destroyed. Wail, you oaks of Bashan, for the strong forest has come down, a voice of the wailing of the shepherds, for their glory is destroyed. A voice of the roaring of young lions, for the pride of Jordan is ruined." This right here, this is really speaking about the destruction of Jerusalem. It's kind of invoking this imagery. The pride of Jordan, the temple, is destroyed. The cedars of Lebanon, that's usually a reference to the temple. So this is announcing what's about to happen. The temple is going to be destroyed. "Thus says Yahweh my God, feed the flock of slaughter. Their buyers slaughter them and go unpunished. Those who sell them say, 'Blessed be Yahweh, for I am rich.' And their own shepherds don't pity them. For I will no more pity the inhabitants of the land, says Yahweh, but behold, I will deliver the men, every one into his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of his king. They will strike the land, and out of their hand I will not deliver them. So I fed the flock of slaughter, especially the oppressed of the flock. I took for myself two staffs, the one I called favor, and the other I called union, and I fed the flock. I cut off the 3 shepherds in 1 month, for my soul was weary of them, and their soul also loathed me. Then I said, I will not feed you that which dies, let it die, and that which is to be cut off, let it be cut off. And those who are left, let each eat other's flesh." So, these two staffs, favor and union. Favor is Strong's 5278. It's noam, which means agreeableness, delight, suitableness, splendor, or grace. Union, on the other hand, is Strong's 2256, chabel, which means a rope, like a twisted rope, especially with regards to a measuring line. By implication, it could mean a measured district or inheritance, or a noose, or a company, as in people that are tied together by the rope, right? It could also be a violent pang or spasm, especially during childbirth, or it could just mean ruin. So why did the translator choose union? Well, because in the next, I think it's in the next slide, it tells you that the union he's talking about is the brotherhood between Israel and Judah. So that's why union is used. But this chabel has a lot of various meanings. So the one staff called favor and the other is union. I will cut off the 3 shepherds in 1 month. So not particularly certain of what this means. I could see how it could be the kingly leadership, the priesthood, and then like the scribes. I could see that, basically the Herodians and the Sadducees and the Pharisees. I could see that as being the three shepherds. Usually shepherds have to do with kings. You see kings referred to a lot of times as shepherds, but also the priesthood does play into that too. My soul was weary of them, and their soul also loathed me. I think if we're considering this in the context of first century Judea, I do think that could be a very accurate understanding of what is meant there, because the Herodians, the Pharisees, and the Sadducees, they all pretty much loathed Yeshua, and one could even say they loathed God too. They turned God into this divine patron instead of the king that he was. I took my staff favor and cut it apart, that I may break my covenant that I made with all the peoples. In the book of Revelation, I discussed that this breaking of the seals, that's exactly what's going on in the book of Revelation. Breaking the staff, breaking the covenant, breaking the 7 seals off that document, the scroll. That's the covenant with Judah being broken, being divorced. So I took my staff favor and cut it apart, that I may break my covenant that I made with all the peoples. It was broken in that day, and thus the poor of the flock that listened to me knew that it was Yahweh's word. I said to them, if you think it best, give me my wages, and if not, keep them. So they weighed my wages, 30 pieces of silver. Yahweh said to me, throw it to the potter, the handsome price that I was valued at by them. I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them to the potter in Yahweh's house. So that's obviously messianic prophecy there. Then I cut apart the other staff, even union, that I may break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. Yahweh said to me, take for yourself yet again the equipment of a foolish shepherd. For behold, I will raise up a shepherd in the land, who will not visit those who are cut off, neither seek those who are scattered, nor heal that which is broken, nor feed that which is sound, but he will eat the flesh of the fat sheep, and will tear their hooves in pieces. What does that sound like? Eat the flesh of the fat sheep, tear their hooves in pieces. That's the wolf being invoked again. That's the way wolves are. They tear apart the sheep. And again, Genesis 49:27, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he will devour the prey, at evening he will divide the plunder. So again, you have the wolf being invoked. It's not being invoked by name, but it's there. This worthless shepherd. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. That's what Yeshua just said. He said the worthless, the hired hand will abandon the sheep, leave the flock. It's the same. Yeshua was just paraphrasing, and he was invoking this prophecy. It's just he was using different language to invoke it. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. The sword will be on his arm, and on his right eye. His arm will be completely withered, and his right eye will be totally blind. So do we know anyone in the New Testament that this could apply to? Someone called foolish shepherd. He's going to be raised up after Yeshua departs. I mean, that was what Yeshua was really referring to at the beginning of John chapter 9. He says, I'm the light of the world, and while I'm in the world, it'll be daytime, but then I'm going to leave, and it'll be night when no one can work. He's saying that something's coming after me. Someone's coming after me. And it's this foolish shepherd. I will raise up a shepherd in the land. That's after Yeshua departs. Woe to the worthless shepherd who leaves the flock. But what about this right eye being totally blinded? Did Paul have a vision problem? 2 Corinthians 11:16. I say again, let no one think me foolish shepherd. But if so, let yet receive me as foolish, that I may boast a little. That which I speak I don't do according to the Lord, but in foolishness. In this confidence of boasting, see that many boast after the flesh, I will also boast, for you bear with the foolish gladly, being wise. Somebody is calling Paul foolish. Someone is invoking this imagery of the foolish shepherd, and Paul's responding to it. Next chapter, 2 Corinthians 12:11, right after Paul admits to being possessed by a demon. And in that passage, 2 Corinthians 12:9, I think, he's talking about having a thorn in his flesh. Could it possibly be his arm is withered? Maybe. I have become foolish in boasting. You compel me, for I ought to have been commended by you. For in nothing was I inferior to the very best apostles, though I am nothing. Truly the sign of an apostle were worked among you in all practice, in signs and wonders and many works, mighty works. And this is exactly what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 24. He says, don't be led astray, because false prophets are going to arise, working signs and wonders. And then you have Paul here saying, don't you remember all those signs and wonders I worked? How can you reject me as being an apostle? It's because Yeshua told us not to fall for signs and wonders. He said, don't be deceived, don't be led astray. And I've heard Christians actually appeal to this. They say, well, how can you say Paul was a false apostle or a false prophet? He was doing signs and wonders. Don't you remember? It's like, yeah, and I also remember Matthew 24, where Jesus said, don't fall for the signs and wonders. Like, it's all there. Yeshua did an excellent job of warning us. We just don't want to listen to him. I beg you, brothers, become as I am, for I also have become as you are. You did me no wrong, but you know that because of weakness of the flesh, I preached the good news to you the first time. That which was a temptation to you in my flesh you didn't despise nor reject, but you received me as an angel of God, even as Messiah Yeshua. What was the blessing you enjoyed? For I testify to you that if possible, you would have plucked out your eyes and given them to me. So Paul says that he has a weakness in his flesh, and he says that the Galatians would have plucked out their eyes and given them to him. In other words, the problem, the weakness in his flesh was in his eyes. What did we just read in Zechariah 11 about the worthless shepherd? He will be blind in his eyes. See with what large letters I write to you with my own hand. Why is he writing large letters? Maybe he can't see, and he has to write large to be able to see. I mean, like, I've got glasses. Believe me, if I don't have my glasses on, I have to write large myself to be able to see. See with what large letters I write to you with my own hand. Which, it kind of begs the question, like, obviously Paul's not writing his own letters. He will sign off on his letters, and he does this frequently. He says, I'm signing off with my own hand. So in other words, someone else writes his letter, and then Paul comes in at the end, and he might just sign it or give like a little salutation. It's speculation, but is it possible that his right hand is also withered and he has trouble writing? He has vision problems. He also has trouble writing because his hand is messed up, like Zechariah said. I mean, like I said, it's just speculation. We don't know for sure, but the eyes are an open and shut case. He tells you right here what's wrong with him. He's got vision problems. So what did Yeshua say about the blind leaders? Were all of these references to blind leaders, were they references to Paul? Matthew 15:1, and the Pharisees and scribes came to Yeshua from Jerusalem, saying, why do your disciples disobey the tradition of the elders? For they don't wash their hands when they eat bread. And he answered, why do you disobey the commandment of God? Because of your tradition. For God commanded, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever may tell his father or his mother, whatever help you may otherwise have gotten from me is a gift devoted to God, he shall not honor his father or mother. You have made the commandment of God void because of your tradition, you hypocrites. Well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, These people draw near to me with their mouth and honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine rules made by men. So notice that his criticism here is that they are not following the commandments. They're teaching doctrine as rules made by men. And so what does he call them because they're not following the commandments? Well, he says, at that point, he summons the multitude and says to them, hear and understand, that which enters into the mouth doesn't defile the man, but that which proceeds out of the mouth, this defiles the man. Then the disciples came and said to him, do you know that the Pharisees were offended when they heard this saying? But he answered, every plant which my heavenly Father didn't plant will be uprooted. Leave them alone. They are blind guides of the blind. If the blind guide the blind, both will fall into a pit. So, why were they blind? Because they were not teaching the commandments of Yahweh. They were teaching rules set by men. And people will quite often try to use this to say that Yeshua did away with all the dietary commands, and now he made it so that you can eat bacon. But keep in mind, this has nothing to do with eating meat. We go all the way back to verse 2. When they eat bread, they were eating bread. Mark also plainly says they were eating bread when this whole incident occurred. So this, what you eat, not defiling yourself, has nothing to do with eating meat. It has, they were eating bread. He says this has to do with eating with unwashed hands. That's the context. People try to take it out of context and use it to prove something about eating flesh, but flesh was not being eaten, just bread. Peter answered him and said, explain the parable to us. And Yeshua said, do you also still not understand? Don't you understand that whatever goes into the mouth passes into the belly and then out of the body? But the things which proceed out of the mouth come out of the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart come evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, sexual sins, thefts, false testimony, and blasphemies. Interestingly enough, Paul is accused of every one of these things at some point. He's either accused of these things, or the book of Acts portrays him as clearly doing these things, like false testimonies. Twice he goes into court and makes a false testimony. Blasphemies, Paul admits to being a blasphemer. Murders, when he is bitten by a snake at the end of the book of Acts, this woman says, surely you're a murderer. All of these, he's accused of all this stuff. Sexual sins, there's things that are said in the book of Jude and 2 Peter that they're talking about someone who sounds a lot like Paul, and they're speaking about him teaching sensuousness, and in the context it sounds like it's some type of sexual sin. So everything in 19 that's being invoked is something that is connected in one way or another to Paul. These are the things which defile the man, but to eat with unwashed hands doesn't defile the man. Notice he doesn't say, but to eat unclean flesh doesn't defile the man. Flesh eating is not even being addressed here. They're eating bread. Yeshua's giving them a lesson on sin, and that sin will defile you. But there's nothing in this discussion has anything to do with eating meat. And so Yeshua went out from there and withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So that was kind of the end of that little exchange. But notice that Yeshua's words about the blind leading the blind, that's literally what Paul was doing. He was blind, and he was going to try to lead the Gentiles, who they themselves were blind. Luke 6:39, he spoke a parable to them. Can the blind guide the blind? Won't they both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his rabbi, but everyone, when he's fully trained, will be like his rabbi. It's interesting how he said that about the blind leading the blind, but then he immediately goes into a statement about any of his disciples should be like him, be like his rabbi. which Paul taught things contrary to what Jesus taught. Why do you see the speck of chaff that's in your brother's eye, but don't consider the beam that's in your own eye? Or how can you tell your brother, let me remove the speck of chaff that's in your eye, when you yourself don't see the beam that's in your own eye, you hypocrite? First remove the beam out of your eye, and then you can see clearly to remove the speck of chaff that is in your brother's eye. So what does this have to do with Paul? Well, I think if you read Galatians and 2 Corinthians, and you see how harsh Paul is talking about the genuine apostles, criticizing them, calling them false apostles and servants of Satan and all these things. Meanwhile, he ignores the beam that's on his own eye. He ignores the false teachings that he's given, the way that his teachings contradict Messiah. Like, Paul really is the picture of this parable of ignoring the beam in your own eye and pointing your finger at the little speck in your brother's eye. For there is no good tree that produces rotten fruit, nor again a rotten tree that produces good fruit, for each tree is known by its fruit. For people don't gather figs from thorns, nor do they gather grapes from a bramble bush. The good man out of his good treasure of his heart brings out that which is good, and the evil man out of the evil treasures of his heart brings out that which is evil. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth speaks. And reading this, it makes me think of 2 Corinthians, all that boasting that Paul was doing in, I think it's in 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and 11, boasting like a madman. I mean, and the thing is, if you read that out loud, he literally sounds like an insane person, ranting. For out of the abundance of the heart his mouth will speak. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and don't do the things which I say? Again, like everything being said here in this little section in Luke chapter 6 is about Paul. Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and does them, I will show you who he is like. He's like a man building a house, who dug and went deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when the flood arose, the stream broke against the house and could not shake it because it was founded on the rock. And then he goes into talking about the house built on sand. This is a parable that I've spoken about numerous times. You take this and you compare it to Isaiah 28, where it's a parable that's almost identical to what Isaiah says about this covenant. There's a covenant with death and Shaul, death and Saul. Now, I mean, your translation probably says death in the grave, but the grave there is Sheol, which is spelled exactly the same as Shaul or Saul. And so I'm not going to go into that whole story here again, because we'll be on here for another 30 minutes if I do. But I did a video. Yahweh says he's going to annul your Pauline covenant in Isaiah. I'll put a link in the description to that if you want to watch it. But he's going through all of these statements in in Luke chapter 6. Every one of them pertains to this foolish shepherd that's coming after him. The blind one who's going to be leading the blind. So, anyway, that's it for today. I found that very interesting. I think what it is, it's a little more complicated to explain, but I think we do have another definite warning against Paul being uttered by Yeshua. So, thanks for listening, and pray this has been a blessing to you, and shalom.